Sorry about that. Hello, fellow druids. We're back. I'm doing some more model unit reviews today. There are multiple episodes. I will schedule them, so you've already seen some potentially when this comes out. Anyways, today in this episode, what I want to discuss is the Tharn Blood Shaman. And yep, so let's get into it. So this model releases in January, actually. It was pre-released at War Machine Weekend, so if you're wondering where you can find it, that is when and where. I played games with this. I played some games with this in the CID. I don't believe I've actually played it since it's been released. So we're going to be talking a little bit more theory on it. Part of the reason for that is it's not actually tournament legal as of now, and I've had a couple tournaments I've gone to. So, anyways, the Tharn Blood Shaman is a circle solo, and visually, by the way, this is a model in the female Tharn of the female Tharn variety. So I think the stats will sort of show you that anyways, but I just wanted to mention it since I don't have like the model up or anything. Anyways, so she is speed 7, strength 6, mat 7, rat 4. The rat is irrelevant though. Defense 14, armor 11, command 7, pathfinder, stealth, and on a small base. She has 2 initial melee attacks actually. She has a spear that is range 2, power and strength 11, and it is damage type magical, and also a ritual blade which is a half-inch range, power and strength 9, and damage type magical. She has 5 wounds, point cost 4, and has field allowance 1. Flipping the card over, she has the attached rule. So before the start of the game, attach this model to a friendly faction warlock for the rest of the game. Each faction warlock can have only one model/unit attached to it. Okay. And then additionally, she has the rule Battle Wizard, which says once per turn, when this model destroys one or more enemy models with a melee attack during its activation, immediately after the attack is resolved, you can make one magic ability, special attack, or special action. It so turns out she has 3 of those. So her magic ability is 6. She has, her first action is called Blood Ritual. It is range 3. Target friendly living faction model. If the model is in range, remove it from play. If target model was removed from play, then choose one friendly faction warrior model in this model's command range. That model gains Divine Inspiration for 1 turn. And as a note, a model with Divine Inspiration gains an additional die on melee attack, melee damage rolls, and you discard the lowest die of each roll. She also has Harmonious Exaltation, which is also a special action. It is range command, which is 7, as I mentioned a minute ago. Target this model's warlock. If it is in range, once this turn when the warlock casts a spell, reduce the cost of that spell by 1. And then finally, Spell Slave, which can be a special action or attack. It depends on the spell. This model must be in the warlock's control range to make the Spell Slave special action. When it does, it casts one of those spells on the warlock's card with a cost of 3 or less. This model cannot cast upkeep spells or spells with a range of self or control. When casting an offensive spell, it is a magic attack. Uses model's magic ability score when making magic attack rolls. And then finally, she has Set Defense, which is a model in this model's front arc, suffers -2 on charge, slam power attack, and impact attack rolls against this model. Okay, so the Blood Shaman. Let's talk about the one big thing. It's sort of made its way through the social media, if you follow any of the discussion post CID. So in CID, she was, I think, 5 points at the end, and the Blood Ritual rule could affect all friendly faction models, so that included War Beasts. And as a result of that, a lot of people were much higher on this model's inclusion in lists. I would say to the point of her virtually being considered an auto-include in many of these lists. With the change, a lot of people have changed their tune. And honestly, I would say a lot of the hype around this model has diminished almost to 0. And I personally think that's a mistake. This was one of the outcomes that I actually foresaw in the CID happening with this model. It's unfortunate that we didn't see any testing of that, because I think some people sort of feel like they were, they have this like feeling they were misled or something. But it's CID, and this is a great example of how you should not really make any assumptions on what will or will not come out of testing, because we're testing for them, and what they're looking for may not be necessarily what we think. So, but with that said, I actually think this model's still really great, but I don't think it is an auto-include. For example, I've played an Iona list recently that did not include her. I've played a few other lists that didn't, partially because she's not tournament legal yet, and I've gone to a couple tournaments, but I definitely think that she's going to be, she's shifted now to the point where all of the abilities on her card are relevant, and you're not just bringing her to throw out that Divine Inspiration rule. It also sidesteps some things that I think were concerning, where like when 2 is stacking those effects. A Protector can do that on Adjudicators, but we don't do that in Circle, I guess. But I think that's okay. We have Primal, we have buffs. I think we've gained plenty of ways for our War Beasts to be more accurate and do more damage throughout the course of the existence of Circle, to be honest. So, but let's talk. So you're going to bring this model to use at least one of those abilities, right? I don't think, while it's cool that she has 2 attacks and she's stealth and she's a solo and stuff like that, you're definitely going to need to feel like you're getting use out of at least one of, and ideally 2 or 3 of those abilities. So let's sort of talk about those. The Harmonious Exaltation is the one that is like generically you could justify it with almost any caster, because it's Fury efficiency, right? So we've talked about the Druid Wilder, probably not in a long time now, but one of the things she does is allow your caster to have an upkeep out there for free every turn, and that virtually saves your Warlock 1 Fury. This model sort of does the same thing, but instead of doing it on an upkeep, it's going to happen on a spell that is cast. So it's similar, but it depends on how active your caster is going to be, right? And obviously it depends on if you're in the Tharn theme. So she can only be taken in Devourer's Host or in a non-theme list. So that's one thing to consider. Another thing to consider is that -1 spell depends on like how often you're going to be casting additional spells, right? So I'm trying to think of some good examples here. So somebody like Baldur 1 may, although I don't think that Baldur 1's a bad place to put this model, but I'll get to that why in a second. But Baldur 1 may not get as much use out of Harmonious Exaltation, because a lot of what Baldur 1 is going to do is actually going to be upkeeping Solid Ground and I just forgot the name of it. Stone Skin. However, on a turn where Baldur wants to cycle Stone Skin, it would actually be very good, right? So maybe it is a good choice with Baldur. Baldur 1. So, and there's a lot of casters like that, right? That anybody who wants to cycle an upkeep, anybody who casts offensive spells, anybody who has a spell they cast every turn. So like a Kruger 2, for example, casts Windstorm on a lot of turns. Being able to do that for 2 now means Kruger can cast, say, 2 Telekinesises. This is a bad example because she can also cast the Telekinesis, but he can cast that and 2 Telekinesis and still sit on 1 focus, or something to that effect, right? So something to consider there. Most casters are going to be able to find ways to use this ability. The less focus they have, Fury they have, the better. Mosar is one that is particularly interesting because mathematically this does allow him to get a potentially 5th Pillar of Salt, because he can maltreat to get to 9 Fury. You can reduce the cost, which means he could cast 5. I don't know if that's ever going to be what you want to do, but he can do it. She cannot be attached to Wormwood, so if you are starting to have those dreams of getting out an extra Hellmouth, I'm here to tell you that's not going to happen. I think mathematically it still wouldn't have happened anyways, because he only gets 10 Fury and 3 for, doesn't work. But Nonetheless, so that ability is going to always be kind of relevant. I would say if you think that's the only reason you're bringing her, I would still probably question whether or not that 4 points isn't better spent as another 4 points. But you are going to be able to get something out of that every time. So let's go ahead and talk about the Blood Ritual. Let me make sure I'm actually calling that the right thing. Yeah, Blood Ritual. So Blood Ritual requires a couple things to really matter. One, you need to have a target that you actually want to put it on, right? So you're putting Divine Inspiration on a model. That model needs to be able to do some work in your Devourer's Host. So the models that stick out to me, keep in mind it's only melee attacks, so that's going to apply here too. But the models that stick out to me are Call, probably Skull or Tala from the Death Wolves. I would say with Skull probably having slight precedence. Lord of the Feast is going to be a great target. Theoretically, actually putting it on any of the Ravager types, so White Mane or any of that type, or even potentially just a Blood River Night Witch in the right instance, could be pretty strong, in fact. And then possibly your Warlock, right? So notable Warlocks, Grail, if you play him in Devourer's Host, would be a very good choice. Chromac 2, if you want to try him out in Devourer's Host, would be incredibly strong. I did try that actually in CID, and he feeded, charged a full health Vulcan. He had 3 corpses because I also had the Crockpot in the list. So anyways, I feeded, charged a full health Vulcan with 3 corpses and Divine Inspiration and my feet, so straight dice, and I killed it and still had 5 Fury left. So, that's pretty good. Chromac, I do believe, technically Chromac 1 gets the most attacks, but I do believe Chromac 2 is technically the most, it would make the most advantage. I'm saying this very poorly, but he would use it the best. He can have 11 attacks in a turn because of corpses and his Fury stat and his initial. And they can be at power and strength 19 if he's on his feet turn. So in my opinion, Chromac 2 probably makes the most use out of this ability. But in a pinch, Iona's going to make some decent work out of it. Actually, Morvana 2 can do some pretty significant work as well. A Baldur 2 is an interesting one from time to time. I could see as the game progresses, if he really needs to take something down, he's got a couple worm tokens on him. You could go at it that way. Yeah. There's probably a couple I'm forgetting, but those are notable. And you may just want to do it in a pinch because you really need to get work out of something you didn't think you were. Now, that's half the problem, right? You need to have a target for the ability to use it, but you also have to have a target to actually sacrifice. And there's some things to take note of there. First, it is friendly faction model, and you're in Devourer's Host. That means your options, so we're going to look at the least expensive options, right? You have things like Blood Trackers, Blood Weavers. I would say those are your most inexpensive, most like the models you can most afford to lose one of, right? It's going to be a Blood Weaver Grunt or a Blood Tracker Grunt. They're sort of the cheapest and the most plentiful, right, for the points. You generally don't want to be... I did the math, but they both come well under 2 points a model. A Blood Tracker is like 1.6 and a Blood Weaver is like 1.3 points a model. You have some other things you can do, like you could just sacrifice Gallows Grove that are 2 points a model. If you don't think you're going to be slinging any spells anymore or whatever, it might be the right play. Also, the point of the game matters a lot, right? Maybe it is worth sacrificing a Ravager if it can't get to where you need to go or it's already activated and you really need to do work somewhere else. But keep in mind, this ability is going to cost you something, so you need to be gaining something for it. Beyond that, the other thing to take note of is you want to try, if possible, to use this ability after things have activated, because that's another way that you can get efficiency, right? At least you can get that turn where you used that model, it went up, it activated, then you sacrifice it, then something else can go up, activate, and do work. So that's another piece of this puzzle to keep in mind. It does mean that it's going to adjust the way that you may want to consider adjusting the way you play your list, or determine what the primary ability you're going to be using is. We have one more to talk about, of course, but if the model is more there for the other two abilities, and this is just sort of there, then just remember it's there. And those are going to be games where if you have to sacrifice something, you do it, and you get work out of it. If you're counting on this ability sort of in your math and your ability to do attrition or work throughout the game, you're going to want to consider some of those, having some of those less expensive models in your list in order to be able to accomplish that. Just something to consider. All right. And then finally, Spell Slave. So in my opinion, this is actually the rule that will continue to keep this model relevant, because I think there's actually a few more instances where this matters than a lot of people think. So we have several casters that have some very, very good spells, and some of them will want to play in this theme. And actually, this makes this model one that you want to bring in some lists that you might have otherwise not looked at Devourer's Host. So prominently of that type of thing is Baldur 2, actually, where if you've ever played Baldur 2, a lot of what you're doing there is throwing out Roots of the Earth on targets. So a lot of times Baldur is going to cast a Roots or two, and the Megalith throws a Roots out, or if you bring a Wold Warden, you throw a Roots out, and you're playing in Bone. He's been played in Bones most of the time recently, and you're sort of just going to be throwing those out like I just described. However, with this model in there, now you can get instead of spending 14 points on a Wold Warden, and you're probably still bringing Megalith, which is nice because I think he's just good anyway. So you've got Megalith with Baldur, and you can bring Loki and Getorix if you'd like now because of the changes. And then you bring along this model, and this model can cast another Roots, and you only spent probably a free card, to be honest, or 0 point, or 4 points to get your second sort of like free Roots cast without spending your caster's resources. And that's a really big deal for her, in my opinion. And then also I did mention earlier, late game, you could juice up Baldur and send him in. But other casters, though, Kruger 2 has Telekinesis, which is a great spell for her to cast. Potentially, you could try Gallows, but without being able to boost, that's a little less... well, it would still be fine. Morvana 1 picked up Mortality, so if you can get Mortality on a target, that is very, very much a big deal. Occasionally Influence or Eruption of Life is going to be good. Baldur 1, you might get an Earth Spikes out there from her. I think in general, Baldur 1 would use her other abilities, but it's not to be discounted. And in general, Circle just has a lot of really good offensive spells, so this is something that you will always be able to do a little bit with. It's just you want to really be looking at what casters get more out of this. So like Chromac 1, you could play with in this theme with her, and he's going to get more out of, I would say, Harmonious Exaltation, because he can get all his upkeeps out early. He's spending a lot of focus from turn to turn. He might want to cycle something at a cheaper value and so forth. So that's something to consider there. Anyways, so what that does is combines to a very neat little package for command attachment that does something very different than what the Wilder does, and does something different than a lot of other models do. You also just have in a pinch that she has 2 initials, which means actually utilizing her for Battle Wizard is possible, or is a lot more feasible, especially with Mat 7. Just, she brings a couple magic weapons to the list. She's overall a very good piece. I would certainly consider her in many lists. So, and the model's neat. It's not, I wouldn't say it's like any spectacular model, but it's neat. It's decent. Pardon me. Yeah, and with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up, though. So, anyways, Tharn Blood Shaman, she hits the shelves sometime in January. I actually need to look at the timings so that I make sure she's actually available for ATC, but I think she should be based on where in the month that event falls. I'm very excited to consider her more. Like I said, a lot of potential there, a lot of thinking. I think creative use of her is going to be one of the she's a piece that sort of will reward that. So thanks for tuning in again. As always, check out the links below. You can hit me up on the Discord, the Facebook group. I'm on Twitter and other social media. And yeah, so thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.